Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today, good day. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic, and this is our step guide discussion meeting. Please join me in prayer. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Once a month on the first Monday, usually, Labor Day was an exception, we meet to discuss and share our questions, our experience with each other so that we can be helpful to those who have approached us for help or be available to those who are looking for help. And that's the whole point here, to be a step guide or to learn about what does it mean to be a step guide. There's obviously a ambiguous gray line between step guide and sponsor. From my standpoint, the ideal would be that a sponsor would be a step guide. The primary role, I believe, of a sponsor is to point the way on the path to the light, to use the Buddhist model. And the steps, of course, are the way of life, as Bill phrases it. But there are sponsors who are really good sponsors. My first sponsor for 28 years was a really good sponsor in the sense of a sounding board of common sense. He just didn't know much about the big book or the steps, so I had to go outside that to engage men over different parts of my journey to go through the steps to have a new experience. Now, I did not know that. Most of you know my story. At the time, I was just doing what I felt I was being led to do. And then in retrospect, you can look back over 20, 25 years and go, oh, that's what was happening. Yeah. And so now I can formalize it and kind of bring it to our consciousness as a methodology or a role, actually, the step guide as a role to be a project manager.
I have an ethical question more than anything else. Someone with 90 days, a newcomer, approached me yesterday at a meeting that I was chairing afterwards, saying that her sponsor lives in another time zone, and she, she's having to challenge to set times to speak to her. Would it be okay to ask me to be there for her? I said, look, let's meet. There was no time to talk. I said, call me, let's meet and we'll talk. I know it's not directly related to the STEP workshop, but I know for myself I can best help with being a step guide and not with being a sponsor. But I don't want to push it on her. And what would be the best thing to do for that person who's come in? She heard me. I think she liked me, or she thought, she was quite she liked the meeting and she liked me, and she came up to me immediately afterwards. And if she has a sponsor already, what's the best advice that I should be giving her?
Well, you just shared an awful lot of the story and some of the question, but I'm not really sure So what did she ask from you?
She actually wanted me to be her sponsor if I wouldn't have time to speak, because her sponsor lives in another time zone.
Oh,
And
so do you want to be her sponsor?
no, I would like to do, I'm best at being a step guide and not a sponsor.
Well, that's what you tell her then.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what you tell her. Just be authentic. You know, I don't know what your words would be, but I prefer not to be a sponsor, but I really feel that my calling is to take people through the steps. Would you like to do that?
And does she need to check this with her sponsor in a, you know, in an ethical form? Does she need to get the okay from her sponsor, or does she give her kosher?
It's probably, I would step away from the ethics sort of vocabulary. What's the appropriate in terms of communication and relationships terminology? I would always recommend that they talk to their sponsor about whatever they're thinking of doing. I did. I went to my sponsor and I said, I've just met a man I think that can help me with the steps. Is that okay with you? And he said, Herb, you need all the help you can get. Go for it. So yes, exactly. Now, you're not asking your sponsor's permission at all. All right, sponsors don't give permission because they don't have that power or authority, or it's inappropriate for them for you to do that, place that burden on them. But they're a wonderful sounding board for somebody, and they have a right to know in one sense, but gentle there. I'm uncomfortable with the words right to know. Yeah.
Just can't get over something you said half an hour ago. And I've never heard you say this. You and I were both periodic drinkers and same amount of sobriety. And you've explained many times what periodic means and how it struck you. And I know that also being in a food fellowship, and the young lady you were talking to was picking up now and then, but had spells of abstinence.
Yeah.
And you said intermittent reinforcement is the strongest reinforcement.
Yeah.
I've never heard you say that before.
Mm-hmm.
And it blew me away, actually.
Yeah.
It gave a title more than periodic drinking. It gave it honor. It gave it a place.
Yes.
Not a bad thing.
No, it's scientific.
One of those things.
Yeah.
And many people would say, well, you're not alcoholic then if you couldn't leave it alone for a while. But it really put it in a place for me. And I wondered, with this new sentence, intermittent reinforcement, it must stretch across other things like defects of character. Maybe everything. You could manipulate, if manipulation was one of your things, and then you could not do it for a while. So this new sentence to me has opened a whole new world, a door, giving something credence. So that's not what I was going to say, but
well, no, I don't say it very often because it doesn't. But anyway, yeah, it helped me explain me.
It was absolutely amazing. And one of the things I might have been going to say, I'm still getting emails from people asking, do they have to be in the same fellowship? And the short answer is no. You don't have to be in the same fellowship if you're step guiding somebody, because we do say this from time to time in an introduction, but I'll just say quickly that step guiding is about the work. Fundamentally, it's up to you if you want to be a friend or a sponsor or anything, but fundamentally, you don't have to be in the person's fellowship that you're step guiding, because the work is the work, and this process and this methodology is what you'd be step guiding in, rather than talking about someone's drinking or eating.
Right.
You can if you want to, but that's not why we started this. So I don't know if you've got anything to say back on that, Herb, or
Only to reinforce it, and to also make very clear that if you are not in their fellowship, it's inappropriate of you to give them any advice with regard to their addiction.
Yep.
So I'm not in a food fellowship. Now I have some exposure. I have heard lots of experience, so I can share what I heard, but not because I know it, but because I heard it. That might be helpful if I keep that in the context. But stay out of the addiction issue in the sense of the kind of sponsor things that are appropriate for that addiction, because you don't have the experience. If you don't have the experience, have the humility to say, I don't have the experience. Talk to your sponsor or somebody in your fellowship.
Yeah. And I like the way you've been talking to sponsors about sponsorship.
Yeah.
And the fact, I mean, when I first studied with you, it must be 14, 15 years ago, I don't know, my sponsor sacked me at that time.
Yeah. That was the risk in a particular fellowship that my picture was on the post office wall. Yeah.
But I survived. And you know, the way we say we work with what happens, you were talking about that just before. Right. Okay. I found a sponsor that was absolutely suited me more. So, you know, we don't know what's going to happen here in this country. Sponsors recommend, and I can't do this all the time, but give my name and say, I'm your sponsor, but go to Jeanette as a step guide. And, you know, I can't do it all the time, but they're so open. Some sponsors are so open to step guides, because another person has, like your sponsor and your first step guide, your step guide has the experience. And I think more and more nowadays, there's some humility, and we're all working together.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I did not know that. That's a hope, of course. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of questions. A participant on, I think, last week's workshop said to you that she was up to step 9 in something else, and she wanted to ask you a question on step 9. And she said, I've sent emails to all the people I need to make amends to, all the people I've harmed. Nobody's got back to me, so I've finished. And you said, you're not done.
Right.
Can you expand on that, please?
Yes. Well, again, experience as well as opinion enters in here. You're done when you've done everything that you feel that you can do, and that you get some direction from experienced people that is warranted to do. But sending an email or making a phone call and not having the phone call returned or the email returned, that might be satisfaction. It might be, if it's a light touch, harm, very kind of like, probably some disturbance, but not, and I'll use my Catholic background, a venial sin, not a mortal sin, that kind of thing. I think people kind of get the relativity of that. But if it's a serious harm, then normally a second phone call and or a second email to follow up, and that might be the next item, depending on the situation, or a written letter. Now, I don't mean sending another email.
No.
I mean literally writing a letter. Now, if it's a typed letter, that's fine. This might just be age and stage. and generation, but I prefer a handwritten letter.
Yes.
Or, oh, okay, so you're agreeing with, yeah, a handwritten letter that just says something about a hint of mint with regard to the harm, and that if you're interested in spending some time to talk about it, I would welcome a response by phone or by email to make an appointment to get together. And if you don't get a response to that, when you send it, then you're done. Now, I personally add to that, but this, I'm a overreacher. If I don't get a response back, then I would set up a prayer practice. This is my personal, it's not from the big book, but it's my personal. I need a sense of completion. And not getting a response from somebody leaves me very lack of closure. So then I set if it's a 1-day prayer or a 3-day prayer or a 3-week prayer or a 3-month prayer on a daily basis for the healing of that person. And then, and that's a list of things that I need to do, maybe a list of people, that kind of thing. And once I finish the 1 day, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months prayers, then I am done. All right. But I've taken specific actions all the way to the point of a prayer practice for healing. And I've always open to, if I meet the person or if I get a response at some point or some circumstances brings us together, I'm willing to physically make the amend, but that I'm not going to pursue it after that. I'm so glad that you asked that question.
Yeah, thanks. And there was one thing you said to me once, that when I owed somebody a considerable amount of money, that I'd sort of fiddled in the business at the time, and they wouldn't meet with me. And also it was a joint account or banking. And at that time, my husband wasn't willing for me to approach and give this money. But you said to me, draw it out. You don't have to use it. And it gave me a sense of responsibility, not that I was done, that if I ever got the chance, I would. And then some years went by and it was impossible. But I ended up meeting that person and I had the money on me and he wouldn't take it.
And there you go.
And so, yeah, go on.
The big book says we make the best arrangement that we can. We arrange the best deal that we can. It doesn't mean negotiate.
No.
But if they say, oh, no, I don't want the money, you don't owe the money. You know, I hear people get into some new age crystal talk. You can tell that I'm not very much a fan of that. And they say, oh, no, you owe it to the universe. No. No, you don't. No, you don't. When they say you are done, you are done. You are released. You are released. Yeah. But make sure that that's clear and not just you interpreting something, because we have a tendency to cut ourselves a lot of slack. That's where talking to an experienced person will keep you authentic.
And there was one thing I was going to say. I don't really sponsor. I am a temporary sponsor for people, but I believe my calling and my role is as a step guide now, these years. And I just think it's wonderful. And also facilitating groups, smaller groups than yours.
That's my prayer. First of all, that people become step guides. Absolutely. That's what this call is all about. But that people take on the role of facilitating small groups, whether it's weekly or monthly or whatever the rhythm is. That's my prayer, that this is a train the trainer, so that people can, in fact, be little Johnny and Janie Appleseeds. Yes.
Yeah, and there's another small question I wanted to ask you. On page 60, when Bill says it's progress, and you mentioned it half an hour ago.
Yeah.
I believe he's talking about progress, not perfection,
Yes.
in the spiritual sense.
Yes.
Some people are misinterpreting it, and especially in the rooms, as giving them slack on chronic relapse. It's it's progress, not perfection.
Of course.
And it has been mentioned to me. How would you help somebody with the interpretation of spiritual progress, it not applying, short of saying, go to the book and read it again? How would you help someone not come to terms with it, but understand that it wasn't for every little thing that goes along? He seems to be specifically talking about spiritual progress. None of us has ever been able to adhere to these principles.
Actually, in the context of it, as I'm thinking about it with your question, excellent question, is that his comment comes at the end of the list of the 12 steps. So he is saying, here's a list of principles. In fact, he uses that term.
Yeah.
Yeah, be gentle. He's not saying this, but I am. Be gentle. You're not going to embrace step 1 perfectly. You're not going to embrace step 2 perfectly. You're not going to turn in step 3 perfectly. All right. So this is about approximation. This is about progress. And but to answer then the potential misinterpretation, as you were describing it, is that at the end of the 9th step, he says on page 85, we enter the world of the spirit, we are placed in a position of neutrality. That's not progress.
No.
We are placed in a position of neutrality. That's the end game. Now, you might relapse until you get there because you're powerless to get there on your own power, and yet you have the responsibility to make all the effort that you can. My hunch is that you will observe progressive, less frequent relapse as you make the progress toward the neutrality. Yeah. But never confuse effort with results. I know that was a corporate slogan my boss had on his desk. It's totally, how would you say, counter to the spiritual. In fact, effort is everything. Results are none of our business. But in this case, you have neutrality or you don't. And that's the criteria of effectiveness. Not perfection.
No.
But neutrality. And we don't need to get into a discussion about the semantics there.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. Thank you.
No, it's a great question. I hadn't thought about it before, but that the neutrality is the goal. And if you're not there,
taking it to that end incrementally, as it were. Really, you can't lose because it's covered everything. You know that you can see not perfection, but you do know what he's talking about. But then neutrality is promised, so that handles it all, right? That broadens it very much. Thank you.
I had a man who relapsed for 10 years in going to AA and working the steps, and eventually he got neutral with regard to his alcohol, which was a real gift. His life was reassembled and all of the promises. I don't need to go into the detail. However, he failed to connect authentically with 11 and 12, and his addiction bloomed in a different area. He never drank again, but he gained 150 pounds from his eating disorder, which he wouldn't deal with, and he died of a heart attack.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. One time you explained that like a balloon, putting a band round it, and it, it squelches out somewhere else.
It pops out on both sides of the elastic band. So the only way to get a smaller balloon is to let the air out of it. And that's what Bill says about the steps: deflation of the ego at depth. And the ego, in the sense of the false self, that self-centeredness, is the problem. Yeah. Thanks.
Lovely, thank you.
My question, so this is my first time on one of these meetings.
Yes.
So I'm sponsoring 2 women in FA, and one of them is in your other group, and the other one is in the step studies the AWOL step studies that you probably heard about. And I'm hearing a lot that you guys talk about a step guide being separate from a sponsor. And I guess my question is,
it's not the ideal, by the way, but go ahead.
It's not the ideal?
No.
Oh, okay. Because what I want to do is bring to her as sort of a supplement the stuff I'm learning from doing this work. And so there's not a problem with me bringing in the work, like. There's
a problem if you don't.
Good. That's what I thought. All right. That's all I needed to know, really, because many, of course, they're studying the 12 and 12, and they're studying the big book, which is all good stuff. And her first real introduction to all of this.
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's all.
Well, I'm totally supportive of the AWOL, as I understand it, which is a journey through the steps, whether you use the red book, the 12 and 12, the big book, whatever you use, or a combination, and you go this deep. My sense is you go this deep. Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes.
Go that deep and do it maybe more than once.
Yes.
Because you become familiar with the journey, you become familiar with the vocabulary, you become familiar with the experience. But then please dive deeper.
Yes.
Now, you may not want to introduce some of the deeper aspects until they've finished the sort of the broad exposure. That'll be a discernment on your part.
That's right. I can't picture for myself ever doing an AWOL again. It just seems like there's not a good reason for it anymore.
I don't think there's a good reason for it anymore. Yeah, exactly. And excuse me for expanding on it, but trying to maintain a little bit of humor too. But the reality is that many people who have had the exposure to the workshop and have completed the work say, Herb, you ruined my normal AA meetings.
Totally. And on the flip side of that, my step guide says, this may be what saves FA.
Well, and this may be what saves AA.
Yeah.
AA's in trouble.
Is it?
They've lost the connection to the big book. They've lost the connection to the 12 steps. What is the most heard mantra in AA? Put the cork in the jug or go to meetings, and don't drink if your ass falls off. Well, I understand the enthusiasm. It's just ignorant.
Yeah. This is part of what's happening with this woman who's doing great, by the way, with the physical part.
Yeah.
Is that I hear the white knuckling language, which is only going to last you. It's only going to get you so far, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know. I've seen half a dozen men. I have a home group that I've been in for almost 38 years. I've seen a half a dozen men come in with 10 and 15 and 20 years of not drinking. They had an awful personal circumstance. They quit drinking. They didn't know about AA, or if they did, they didn't go. And every one of them has tics and heart attacks and bankruptcy and divorce and horrible challenging lives as a result.
Yeah.
White knuckling leads to suicide
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we've taken away our medication
That's right.
and we've got
And-
nothing to soothe the suffering.
That's right. And
Yeah.
food addicts can start practicing. I started practicing my disease before I turned 1.
Yeah.
There's a lot of seriously, I was a fat 1-year-old. So it's been a long
You got a
time.
lot of reinforcement for that. Oh, she's so cute and chubby.
Exactly.
That's right.
This has been a fascinating discussion this morning, and I think in many ways you've answered sort of the question that I was coming in with, but I decided to go for it anyway. And I'm dealing with both as a step guide and now, although currently I don't have this situation in sponsoring, it comes up often in sponsoring in FA, and the situation is people who cannot seem to get abstinent, and they're in my step group and working with them individually, and that's what they want to do most of anything. They want to get abstinent and stay abstinent, and they, for varieties of reasons, they can't. I don't know what to tell them, really. My experience of abstinence was that when I came into to FA, I was graced with abstinence. I've been graced for over 2.5 years now with food neutrality. I don't know where it came from. I do know that working the steps and the experience of working the steps with you has, and I understand the concept of leaning on the light switch and being fit spiritually and practicing 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. And I do that because I absolutely know that in order to maintain my food neutrality, that's what's necessary. But the question is, what experience can I possibly share with them other than to wait for the miracle? And maybe that's the only thing I can say is just keep. And I think you said something to Jeanette earlier about it's sort of what do you do while the pants are being pressed? How does somebody stay sober when they're working the steps?
Well, they don't necessarily.
Yeah.
No. I mean, your assumption is incorrect. You're saying they have to stay sober while they're working the steps. That's incorrect.
Right. That is a principle.
No, that's
that is applied in FA.
That's basically contradictory to the big book.
Yeah.
The big book says that you might make progress. Look at step 3 in terms of page 63, those promises. You might make progress. Look at step 5, the promises on page 75. But every one of them is relative and approximate, not absolute. But you look at the promises at the end of the 9th step on page 85, it's absolute. You are placed, that's a grace, in a position of neutrality. And so while they're relapsing, they work the steps to the best of their ability, and they make as best effort as they can to get through step 9. Meanwhile, that's why I teach now steps 10, 11, and 12 at the beginning, because these are the tools of consciousness and connection with power. Introduce them certainly to light touch though, step 10 inventory, to step 11, 1 or 2 or 3 or maximum 5-minute daily practice. I don't mean quiet time, because that's misunderstood in most of the people I talk to about quiet time. in a eating disorder program, whichever one they is, they have this requirement for 30 minutes of quiet time. Most people think that they have to be quiet, silent, empty, no thoughts, no mind, and it's wrong. And your own literature in FA is beautiful, it's complete, it's accurate, it's substantial, and it tells you what to do in quiet time. It's not about being quiet. It's about praying and meditating and thinking and hoping. It's a wonderful piece of literature on your quiet time description. If you don't have that literature, it's some sort of a handbook or something that FA has that describes it, because I was so tired of people giving me their understanding of quiet time, which just didn't make any sense at all.
No, there's a lot of misinformation out there about what quiet time is. And I've
in all of the 12 steps, there's a lot of misinformation on what meditation is. Oh, just on what meditation is. Step 11, meditation. That's why that's probably the center of my ministry, is to try to get people to understand and to practice what meditation is.
I did not understand what meditation was until I took your workshop.
Yeah.
You know, no, not at all. And then when you pointed it out, it seemed so vividly clear to me that Bill did not know about mindfulness meditation.
Right.
Or
like it was
Eastern
so simple, it was
philosophy.
shocking, right?
Yeah. And it's been very, very helpful to actually have a meditation practice.
Wonderful, yeah.
So.
I heard you giving a talk on emotional sobriety, and you had talked about mentioning the difference between turning our will over to God and turning our will over to the care of God. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that distinction. And I have another question to ask you.
When you get in your car, assuming you have a car, assuming you have a driver's license and you know how to drive and you have the keys and you know where you're going, but you don't know how to get there. So most of us today would put the address into a GPS and listen to the GPS and follow direction. My GPS is not driving the car. I am. But I am listening to the GPS for directions as to how to get to where I want to go. That's the difference. I don't turn my will and my life over to God. God doesn't want my will and my life. That's my interpretation. That's why I got my life and my will. But here's the key. I get to, watch my hands, I get to turn and be in alignment with my understanding of this flow called God, called reality, called evolution. I am not turning it over to God, becoming one in that sense, losing me. No, I am maintaining me, and I'm in parallel with, based on principles, I'm in parallel with the flow, and I'm relying on that support.
It's like God can't do for us what we can do for ourselves.
Well, God can do it, but not normally does.
Okay, so the GPS doesn't drive the car. I do.
There
The
you go.
GPS guides me to where I need to go.
I need the GPS. If I listen to the GPS and I follow direction, I will get to where I want to go.
Okay, great, thank you. The other one has to do with, I'd like to hear you describe what you feel is the difference between compliance and surrender.
Yeah. Dr. Harry Tebow wrote a paper on compliance versus surrender. I don't remember now what the article said. It's a classic article worth reading, but I'll make it up. Because compliance is, I'm going to do what you tell me to do because you have a gun at my head. Whereas surrender would be, I give up in complete defeat and I will take direction because I need help. Yeah.
One has a lot more sense. The second one has a greater sense of true powerlessness and dependency on power.
In a healthy sense, yes. In a healthy sense, dependency, yes. I want to be careful with that word, yes. Yeah, I would, yeah, reliance on, the word I use for step 3 is alignment. It's not in the big book, but it gives me that real sense of, I have free will. And Bill says at the end of step 11, he has said it throughout the book, but at the end of step 11, he gives us the perfect prayer. Thy will be done. But if you get underneath the words, it's my will that is saying, thy will. I am choosing to be in alignment with your will. Now, my job is to discern what it is. That's how step 11 ends, doesn't it? Praying for the knowledge of your will and then the power to do it. I need to know better and then I'll do better. Just knowing better doesn't mean I will do better. That's the whole point of unmanageability. So I need to know better, and then I need to be empowered to do better. Yeah.
I see. There's something you said that there is disagreement out there about this business about abstinence while working the steps.
Well, I know there is. There's ignorance also.
Yeah, and I just heard a very well-known OA speaker say, somebody asked him, how do I put down the foot if I'm powerless? What do I do? He says, you just put it down. There's no such thing as can't. There's won't, but there's no such thing as can't. And what you were saying is different than that.
Very different.
That because we are powerless, people need time to get through the steps to get the power.
Well, the answer is yes on the surface of it, but I was given freedom from alcohol without asking, without going to AA, without praying, and without even knowing that I had a problem. On February 20th, 1984, the hospital that my wife was in asked me to quit drinking to support her recovery, to quit for 90 days while she was in the treatment program. I said I would. I haven't had a drink or an inclination to drink since. What's that?
So what you often talk about the difference between 1984 and 1988. You said you went to meetings, you did the work, but you had not really felt like you treated yourself.
I didn't say I did the work. If you mean by doing the steps in any effective way, you're so right. You have heard the story so many times, you know it. 1984, I get sober, a gift. 1988, I meet a man who talks differently. He takes me through the steps for the first time out of the book intelligently, so that I knew what the book was saying and what the actions were that would, in fact, bring me to having a spiritual awakening. And I had several spiritual awakenings during that journey. In step 4, in step 7, in step 9, I had different spiritual awakenings, especially in step 11. By the end of it, I could summarize by saying I was changed in the way I think and feel and behave at the radical level. Deep inside me, I had become a different person. All right. So what was your question, your point? Oh, so yes, I had a sponsor. Yes, I went to meetings every day, called my sponsor every day, went to step studies and book studies and sponsored people. Absolutely. Did the steps on my own, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I never got the connection to step 4 and the false self. I never got the connection to step 6 and 7, that I had principles that I was ignoring. I never saw the depth of the chaos I was creating that manifests in steps 8 and 9. I never saw any of that until I did this work in 1988. But I'm going to come back to the big book. I mean, because I can share my knowledge, I can share my experience, I can share my opinion. Nice, interesting, but the big book is, for me, the criteria. In step 9, at the end of step 9 on page 85, right after the promises, all right, is it 85? 84. Bill says, we enter the world of the spirit, we are placed in a position of neutrality for the very first time. He never mentions neutrality as a realized experience until we finish the 9th step. And my understanding, interpretation of addiction in the big book is no choice. That's why I said, without any reverence at all, about AA, that it's garbage. Put the plug in the jug and don't drink no matter what, even if your ass falls off. I mean, I understand the spirit of it. Yes, do the best you can. Yes, absolutely. But if you had that kind of power, you don't need AA. If you had that kind of power, you don't need God. That's my approach to.
Thank you, because that was my experience, just like yours, for 9 years. I did all the work. You know, I did 3 big book studies, but I didn't get it. It's like I was still untreated. And, you know, all of that changed, thank God.
Well, what changed?
What changed? I think I began to really have a deeper acceptance of my malady, and I started to see what I needed to do to change that. You know, it's like neutrality. It's not with just neutrality with the food. It's neutrality with emotions too. It's like withdrawing from everything, from the old ways, the old ideas. And that's what it wasn't just showing up like I'm doing all the work and I'm okay. No, I wasn't okay.
All right, you're talking about emotional sobriety. What precipitated it, and what actions did you do that were different that then gave you this new experience?
I was lying about my abstinence, and the stress and tension it caused was so enormous. And then I had to make amends to 12 people about it from a workshop I did. It changed everything. I realized the lengths to which I was willing to go to hide my weakness, my vulnerability.
A moment of grace.
A moment of grace.
Yeah.
It took a lot, but I got there.
Well, but you didn't precipitate it. I mean, look at what you just said. You worked your ass off for 10 years, and you were lying your ass off for a few years.
Yeah,
but at some point, you had this moment of clarity. Where did that come from? A moment of grace.
Oh, definitely.
See, there's a spiritual intervention here. You can't precipitate it. And we get surprised when we receive it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it was a turning point.
It's the turning point because you cooperated with it in all humility. You made amends to 12 people. Oh my God. That's
yeah, it was tough. That was very difficult.
Yeah. No,
that was a lot of feelings around that. But anyway, that's 8 years behind me. So I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you.
And the question is, how free do you want to be? How healthy do you want to be? How happy do you want to be? It's your choice based on some actions and some humility and maybe some humiliation and then a whole lot of gratitude.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
thank you, Herb.
Hi, Herb. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
So I was at that.
Likewise, by the way.
I was at that Jim Finley, and Herb, when he left, I was in another world. It was
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, you started out, it was great. I learned a lot and I took a lot of notes of what you said, and I appreciate that. But I want to start following him. I just
Oh,
love him.
Oh my God. Yes. Yes.
And then Dr. Luskin, I mean, the people you hang out with is a real reflection on who you are.
Well, I'm really surprised is probably a good word, but also very humbled by their willingness to co-facilitate with me. It was a stretch for me to ask these two people because I hold them in such high regard. I didn't feel I fit into their world, and neither of them had a hesitation at all.
Nice.
And both of them exceed, in terms of our time together in the workshops, exceeded my expectations.
Absolutely. Mine too.
Yeah, but you're right. Dr. Finley is a very unique and special person. He's a clinical psychologist. He gave up his psychology license. He doesn't practice any longer. He just writes books and does a little teaching. But he's an incredibly unique person, and when you're with him, you're having an experience. Yeah.
I totally did. And just his whole idea about who God was and the love that God has, it came through him because how he loves humanity.
There you go.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's why you have a relationship with these two men, because they love what you do, helping other people. That's what they're both about.
And neither of them comes from a 12-step background. That is correct. Yes. One comes from a scientific background. The other comes from a very spiritual background. And yet we're all saying the same thing in terms of the core realities.
Well, that's why they need you, because your background.
Well, in fact, Jim is writing a book on mystical sobriety. And Fred called me 30 minutes after we finished and said, I want to continue doing this. He felt that the 12-step world was the world that really needed for the forgiveness information. Yeah. So that's his whole strategy going forward. So you're right. The universe has brought it all together in a wonderful way.
So now my question about sponsorship. So I'm sponsoring a woman in AA. She got out of the nursing home because she had a bad accident about a month ago. She's on pain medicine. She's in a lot of pain. We've been reading, we started reading the big book, and I think we got up to a few chapters. And then I'm like, she needs to hear the first step. So we are now reading from the 12 and 12, the first step. Good. But so I suggested to her that she needed to go through the steps and she had signed up for your workshop and then she had this accident. But I think she should do the Wally B just to get through the steps. I mean, she had 8 years in AA. She's been through the steps, but she's pretty miserable because she's in so much pain. And I guess it's like, I want to see progress, and it's all about me. And I know it, you say, meet them where they're at, but I think there would be a healing if she went through the steps.
And Wally P's Back to Basics.
Yes.
Do the best you can. Introduce her to the simplicity of it and take her all the way through the steps to see where she lands. Yeah.
Okay. So you agree? Okay.
Oh, 100%. That's why I made the comment about the AWOLs. The AWOLs are wonderful once or twice or maybe 3 times, because they give you the exposure to the concepts and the vocabulary, but they won't necessarily they might, but they won't necessarily give you the experience.
That's right. Yeah.
I have a question about my stance in 12-step programs. I've been troubled ever since you said something about AA being in trouble with the notion of the mindset. And I got sober originally the same year you did, and I heard the same things. Plug in the jug, don't drink if your butt falls off, bring it to a meeting, all that stuff. And at the time, Herb, I was 23. And when I read the big book the first time, I remember going, war fever ran high in the New England town. You know, like it was like mid-century Midwestern prose, and it bored me to death.
I'm sure.
Since then, I'll speed it up. The big book, I imbued the big book with much more meaning. And certainly when I attended your first workshop, my first workshop with you in 2004, it changed my life, as you know, it has changed very many other people's. Okay, so let's get back to the original thing, my stance. So my code for myself is to be the change I want to see in the world. That's what I used to tell my students. And so, okay, so I think that, all right. And so this is how I carry myself, especially in AA meetings. I often share that in the original AA groups, how odd it is and ironic that quiet time was an essential, was like non-negotiable, but meetings were a nice to have.
Yeah.
And how nowadays it's just the opposite, that, you know, once in a while, if I get to step 11, you know, as you know, many people in 11-step meetings will say, well, I'm going to share all about how I don't do it, but God darn it, I get to a meeting every day. Okay, so there's that thing going on, right? And then even at the worst level, I attend OA, and this has to do, and OA is on my resentment list, by the way, because I don't know if it should be as an institution or the people in it, but there's many people in OA and probably other 12-step other than AA who don't even read the big book. There's
Right.
people I know in OA who have never read the big book, and it bugs the shit out of me. And in an early inventory in 1986, I discovered that I want everyone to have my brand of sobriety. So that's a thing. It's a character defect in me that I've continued to work on over the years. Okay, so bring it back to present day. Herb just said AA's in trouble. I read your article from the World Convention a few years ago about how meeting, you know, it's not about meetings. Okay, I get that. Okay, back to my stance. Being the lantern and being the change I want to see. My question is, you know, how, you know, in AA, I feel like I have more freedom to talk about your workshop and how it's changed me and this type of thing, because most people have read the big book or have some familiarity with it. In other 12 steps, in my experience in OA, I don't know what to do, you know, other than say, you know, if I'm talking one-on-one to somebody, I will ask them, you know, if someone's asked me to help them, I'll say, you know, and I try not to do it with too much attitude. Have you read the big book? Like, kind of a thing. And many times I don't know if people are bothered by me, but, you know, I say often, you know, the big book's the only one that has the precise instructions for working this stuff. Anyways, I think I've gotten, like, especially now that you've taken the deep dive, I really feel like sometimes in meetings, I'm like, there's no other dog but Lassie. Okay. If you don't do Herb's workshop, you know, screw it. I'm glad you're reading the big book. That's great information, but, you know, anyways, and I don't say these things. I just think them.
I got it. And the antidote is really simple. Hold the attitude, I want to be helpful. That's all. I want to be helpful. Will righteousness be helpful? Probably not. Will evangelization be helpful? Probably not. Will hard ass be helpful? Probably not. Yeah, sometimes, but not most of the time. So those are the lenses through which I look.
Mhm.
Meet them where they are, and how can I be helpful? Yeah.
The other question I have has to do with the traditions. I've been attending several meetings that I attend that we've decided to read the traditions. And I've been, talking in groups and this and that about how, oh my goodness, I'm so happy that the traditions are saving AA. And yet, okay, so I'm hoping that that's true. Because
Well, I hope it's true. I'm going to do a series next year on the traditions, the first 6 months of next year. And then the second 6 months, I'll do a series on the concepts. So at least to introduce people to the broad strokes of each of them. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Herb, as
Thanks.
always. And then James Finley, what happened with you with James Finley reminds me of what happened to Bill W. with Father Dowling. It's like he employed a spiritual director.
Yeah.
You employed a spiritual director at about the same amount of sobriety.
Yeah.
And I was mesmerized by him. Just
I know.
couldn't believe
Well,
it. Anyways,
as much as I've heard him, I was too. So thank you so much. All right. So let's pray the prayer of transformation. As you know, I've adopted this prayer now at the close of each one of my events and especially my workshops. It captures the entire vision of the turning. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Thank you all.